Mike Thompson, and welcome to our Capitol Report. It's Thursday. I'm in Washington, D.C., getting ready to go over to the floor and cast a vote. After votes today, I'll be coming back to the district, and I hope to see you in the district over the weekend. But I want to just take a moment to give you an idea of what's going on in Washington right now. The big issue, as I'm sure everybody knows, is trying to figure out the fallout or benefit, depending upon your perspective, from the tax bill that the Republicans passed and the president signed into law before the Christmas holiday. There's a couple things that I just want to preface I'm going to answer some questions. I posted that online and invited people to submit questions to be answered to clear up any misinformation or misunderstanding of the bill. Before I do that, I just want to preface those responding to those questions by giving you a little bit of history about the bill. I think everybody is aware of what happened and didn't happen. And in the area of what didn't happen was the majority party in the House and the Senate took a measure, supposed to be a tax reform measure, and literally jammed it through the House and the Senate and onto the president's desk for a signature without any hearings, without hearing from any experts. This is a bill that's going to touch the lives of every American. Wealthy, middle class, low income, poor, everyone's going to be affected by this. States and local governments across the country are going to be affected by it. And I believe that jamming it through without the benefit of any hearings, without the benefit of hearing from any expert witnesses, was a real mistake. And I said it at the time, and it's proven to be true. I'm hearing from tax experts from our district and from across the country who have very, very serious concerns about things in the bill that weren't done correctly, and further concerns about what fixing those problems may lead to. That could make it even worse, or fixes may not even be possible. And those are from folks who do tax work every day. So I think it's important to have an idea of from where we started with this bill. Nothing like this has ever been done, and done this quickly. And if history is any example of any indicator of what's going to happen with this, it looks like the tax laws in this bill are going to be with us for a long time. The last time there was major tax legislation done in Congress, it's been on the books for 30 years. So I think this was a real bastardization of the process, and it really prevented us from doing good tax reform, and instead we got a tax cut bill. We were told by the president and by the Republican majority that this tax bill was not going to benefit wealthy people, that it was going to help working and middle class families. We know already that that's not true. We know that there is huge benefits in the bill. As a matter of fact, 83% of all of the tax cut in this bill will go to the richest 1% of taxpayers and to corporations. We know that it helps the wealthy, it helps the richest people in the country a great deal. We know that the richest people in the country, people who are in the top income tax bracket, are going to see a substantial drop in that bracket. That's not helping working class people, it's not helping most middle class people. And we also know that the estate tax changes in this bill are going to give a huge boost to the richest people. So your first $22 million in estate tax will not be taxed. And there aren't a lot of poor people or working class people who are going to have the benefit of a $22 million estate tax windfall. So those two provisions helped the richest people in the country. And then we also know that while some folks in the middle class and the working class will see some temporary relief from this tax cut, it is in fact temporary. The individual provisions in this bill, provision for individual taxpayers, expires in a couple of years. The portions of the bill for corporations are made permanent. And that's not something that addresses the middle class, working class families' concerns. And then we were also told it was going to be simple. If you remember when talk of doing tax reform first started, the majority party walked around with a postcard in their pocket. And every time they talked about it, they pull out that postcard and they say, this is going to be so simple, you'll be able to do your taxes on a postcard. Well, you haven't heard much about that lately, and it's because the truth of the matter is it's been made more complicated, and there's no way you're going to be able to do your taxes on a postcard. As one of my colleagues said, you'd be lucky to be able to do them on a billboard. And talking to tax experts and hearing some of the complexity issues that are embedded in this bill, I tend to believe them. So we've got a lot of work to do in the area of tax reform. Sadly, this bill didn't do it. It also ballooned our national debt by $2.3 trillion. $2.3 trillion. In other words, we borrowed to give a tax cut to folks who, in many instances, didn't need a tax cut. So our children and our grandchildren are going to pay for this. And I think that's wrong. Most of you know that I've never voted for a tax cut that wasn't paid for in regard to a standalone piece of legislation. I've even voted against my own legislation in the past because it wasn't paid for. And I think that's wrong. We need to be mindful of what we're doing to our national debt. Borrowing to pay for something that the country needs is certainly understandable if it's an emergency. When we were going through the worst recession that we ever had, it was imperative that we borrow money to invest in our communities so we didn't go into a depression. If there was a major war that we were being attacked and we didn't have the money, it would be understandable to be able to provide a common defense for our country, to go into debt to address that emergency. If there's an emergency such as the fires in our district, the mudslides in Southern California, the tornadoes in the South, it's understandable to borrow to fund an emergency. Not dissimilar to what you do as a regular tax-paying, hard-working individual. If your roof blows off and you don't have the money to fix it, you go to the bank and you get a loan. But if you just want to get gold-plated water faucets for the house, you better save up the money. You don't want to go into hock to do something like that. And the idea that we're busting the bank to do this tax cut, not tax reform, tax cut, I found particularly wrong. So as you know, I voted against it. Now let me get to answering some of the questions that we have. The first question comes in from Kevin. What impact do you see this having on those of us living in the 5th District? Well, as I mentioned, if you're a regular individual taxpayer in the middle class or working class, you may get a little bit of a benefit. And I don't know what your situation is if you fall into that category. But what I do know is it's a temporary benefit and it expires. And if in fact folks say, well, they can just extend it, remember, yeah, you can do that, but that also would add to the deficit because if you don't pay for it and they didn't pay for it here, you just add to the deficit. So that's the immediate. The other problem that it has, because it took away folks who itemize their taxes, it took away the ability they have to write off state and local taxes and a big part of their mortgage interest rates. That's money that's going to be lost to both the individuals and to state and local government. So if you're one of the middle class folks who gets a temporary tax break, you may see that voided because you're going to pay more on your mortgage interest rates, or you're going to pay more on your state and local taxes. And then as far as the state and local tax portion goes, any change to that disrupts the delivery of service at the state and local level. So if your counting on more police, more fire, more transportation investments, that could be impacted negatively. Rick asked, why are you against tax cuts for the middle class? Why did you vote against Americans? Well, as I pointed out, I'm not against tax cuts for middle class. Number one, I think they need to be paid for. Number two, this is not a middle class tax cut bill. This is a bill to help corporations and to help the richest Americans among us. And probably most egregious, in my view, it's a real missed opportunity. As I said, we've had 30 years of the existing tax statute. If we'd have gone in with the idea that we're going to reform it, that we're going to build it from the middle class out, we could have made some real positive changes. We could have constructed a tax policy that was fair, that generated more jobs, and that provided more help to the middle class and working class families of the country. And from the beginning, I said that what we needed to do is build tax reform from the middle class out. This bill didn't do it. And then don't forget, it also ballooned our national debt by $2.3 trillion. So those tax cuts that are going to benefit mostly the richest people and benefit corporations, that was put on a charge card that your kids and grandkids are going to have to pay for. Logan wrote, why has your critique of the tax bill emphasized the increase to the national debt and not the income inequality created by a tax plan that will shift money from the poorest Americans to the richest? Do you think the top marginal tax rate should increase? And if so, what do you think it should be raised to? Well, I think I've been pretty balanced on my critique of the bill. As far as everything I know about it so far, as we continue to work through the bill, and remember it was in fact jammed through, so the experts are still doing a lot of review on this. I'm sure there'll be more things to critique. But so far, I think I've been pretty even-handed. I've tried to point out what the bill does, and one of the things it does that is egregious is it borrowed money to pay for the tax inequality, income inequality that Logan talks about in his question. So I've tried to hit on both of them, and in regard to what the tax brackets should be, I think they should be what's fair and equitable, and what makes sure that the distribution of tax reform would look like in a way that focused on the middle class out, not the richest first, and hopefully the crumbs will trickle down to everybody else. We've tried it before. We tried it with the 2001 tax cuts, again with the 2003 tax cuts that didn't create benefits for working and middle class individuals. And as you know, that is in part what led to our recession that did cripple the U.S. economy, and what we are now just recovering from. So I think it was bad policy then, and I think it's bad policy today to put on the charge card tax cuts for individuals. They tried it in Kansas not too long ago, as you know. When Governor Brownback was elected, he went through and cut all the taxes, talking about how that was going to stimulate economic growth and create wonderful things for the state. It nearly bankrupted that state. They went as far as having to reduce school hours for children because they couldn't afford to pay for it with the tax cuts. Val asks, what happens with student loans in this bill? Student loan portion of the bill wasn't touched. That remains the same. The House version did try and take away students and families' ability to get tax help in regard to student loans, but the final bill didn't touch it at all. There's a provision in the bill, however, for what's called 529 accounts that allow you to save money for higher education. That was changed to allow those 529 accounts, which get a taxable benefit, to be used for primary and secondary private school education and also for homeschooling. Jane asks, how can I mitigate the effect of the GOP insistence that we're taxed twice when we can't write off state taxes? Will prepaying property taxes help? I think what Jane is talking about is that we can no longer write off our state and local tax. And the idea of the state and local tax and being able to write that off is that you were in fact being taxed twice. If you pay for a tax to deliver service from the federal government and you pay a tax to get the same service from the state government or the local government, you're paying twice. So for 100 years, the law has been that if you pay a state or local tax, you can take that deduction against your federal tax obligation. It's worked well. It's allowed states the ability to address state and local problems through the tax system. And now that has gone away. And it is, as I said earlier, it is going to be a problem. And if there's financial shortfall to the state and local, you're going to see local services dry up. And that, in fact, is an issue. In regard to prepaying your taxes, there's a lot of confusion over that. I know some people have tried. I know you were able to pay or prepay your second installment of your property taxes, but I think the confusion is as to whether or not you can prepay a tax before it's been assessed. And I know some states are trying to address that, but I'd check with my accountant if I were you. Rachel wants to know, can Social Security be touched? Can Medicaid be touched? This tax cut bill didn't do anything to Social Security or to Medicaid. However, the majority party has stated that because the debt is so high that they want to come back and evaluate what they call entitlement programs. And what an entitlement program is, it's anything you're entitled to. For instance, Social Security. You have paid for Social Security. And because you have paid for it, you're entitled to receive the benefits of Social Security. Medicare is an entitlement program. You pay into Medicare, therefore you're entitled to the benefits of it. Veterans benefits are an entitlement program. You pay into veterans benefits, therefore you're entitled to receive those benefits. Now the Republican majority in the House has a big target on some of those quote-unquote entitlement programs, and they're claiming that the growing national debt is the reason that they have to do it. So be careful on that. Shannon wants to know, how will this bill affect California's infrastructure? And as I stated earlier, although there's nothing in the bill regarding infrastructure per se, if there is a state shortfall because of the loss of state and local dollars from the federal government, that in fact could be one of the services that will run into delivery problems. So you could see transportation dollars, which we critically need throughout our district and just about every other district in the state and across the country, and this could have an effect on that. So that's a little bit of a wrap up on the bill. I'm sure I'll see you in the district where we'll talk about it more, and as we learn more about how this is going to affect you and others across the country, you'll be hearing more from me on it. And I just want to leave you with one thought. Please know that the Democrats in the House, members of my party, are united in regard to stopping any attack on Medicare, on Social Security, or on veterans benefits, or on any of the programs that this majority is talking about cutting in order to make up for what they added to the national debt by passing this wrong-headed tax bill. Thanks so much for tuning in, and I look forward to seeing you in the district.
Great.